A crisp December morning in 2009, the kind that leaves a quiet chill hanging in the air, blanketed the streets of Henderson, Nevada. The city buzzed with the usual hum of life, cars weaving through intersections, the distant chatter of holiday shoppers, the faint clinking of slot machines from a nearby casino. It was the kind of day that felt ordinary. But for one man, it was the last time anyone would ever see him. Stephen Koecher wasn't the type to just vanish. A 30-year-old journalist turned job seeker. He had dreams, ambitions, and a family who adored him. He wasn't the kind of person who would willingly step away from his life without a trace. And yet that's exactly what happened. Security footage captured his final known moments. A young man in a white dress shirt and black slacks, walking calmly through a quiet suburban neighborhood in Henderson, far from the bustling Las Vegas Strip. His posture was steady, his steps purposeful. He didn't look lost or afraid. But what happened after that? Nobody knows. He was never seen again. There were no obvious signs of foul play. His car, a white Chevrolet Cavalier, was found parked near the Sun City Anthem retirement community, miles from his last known residence. Inside the car, investigators found everyday items. Blankets, clothes, Christmas presents. It was as if he had been on his way somewhere important, and then, in an instant, he simply ceased to exist. The mystery of Stephen Koecher's disappearance is filled with unanswered questions. What brought him to that neighborhood? Was he meeting someone? Was he running from something? Or was it something much more sinister? The theories range from the logical to the bizarre. Some believe he got caught up in a bad situation, while others speculate he stumbled upon something he shouldn't have. But one thing is clear. Someone out there knows what happened to him. As we unravel the strange events leading up to his disappearance, we'll dive into the clues, the possible explanations, and the chilling reality that people don't just vanish into thin air. Or do they? Stephen Koecher's story wasn't supposed to end this way. He was a young man with dreams, the kind of person who believed that hard work and persistence would eventually pay off. Born in Arizona, he had grown up in a close-knit family, raised with strong values and a deep sense of faith. Friends described him as kind, polite, and always willing to lend a hand. He wasn't reckless, he wasn't involved in anything dangerous. At least not that anyone knew of. And yet, something led him to that quiet neighborhood in Henderson. Something that would ultimately cause him to vanish without a trace. To understand the mystery of his disappearance, we have to go back to the months leading up to that fateful December day. Stephen had been struggling. He had once worked as a reporter for a small newspaper in Utah, but when the economy took a hit, so did his job. Like so many others at the time, he found himself unemployed, searching for work in an increasingly difficult job market. He bounced around between temporary jobs, taking whatever he could find to make ends meet. He was living in St. George, Utah, renting a room in a house, but money was tight. His bank account was running low, and his bills were stacking up. Despite his struggles, Stephen didn't let on that anything was seriously wrong. He still called his family regularly, still attended church, still tried to maintain a positive outlook. But behind the scenes, there were signs that he was growing more desperate. He had been applying for jobs in different states, even considering work outside of journalism. He had started driving long distances, sometimes without telling anyone where he was going. His phone records showed trips to Las Vegas, Reno, and even California, though no one really knew why. He didn't seem to have any close friends or relatives in those areas, and when asked, he never gave a clear reason for his travels. Then, in early December 2009, his movements became even more puzzling. He told his roommates he was going out of town for a few days but didn't say where or why. On December 12th, he drove from Utah to Las Vegas, a city that had always been a place of opportunity and risk. But Stephen wasn't the type to gamble. He wasn't known to party. He had no criminal record, no history of drug use, nothing that suggested he was involved in anything dangerous. And yet, for some reason, he kept coming back. On December 13th, a day before he disappeared, Stephen attended church in Las Vegas. He seemed normal, polite as always, but also somewhat distant. When the service ended, he got into his car and drove south. He stopped for gas, bought a snack, and continued on. The last confirmed sighting of him was the security footage from that Henderson neighborhood. He parked his car, got out, and walked away. He wasn't carrying anything, didn't appear to be in a hurry. He simply walked past the houses, past the manicured lawns, and then, nothing. The days that followed were filled with confusion and concern. When Stephen failed to return home, his family knew something was wrong. He had always kept in touch, always made an effort to stay connected. For him to go silent was completely out of character. They called his phone, no answer. They checked with his friends. No one had seen him. Desperate for answers, his brother and father drove to Las Vegas, retracing his last known steps. That's when they found his car, still parked in the same spot, untouched. Inside, there were a few personal belongings, some clothes, a blanket, and Christmas gifts he had bought for his family. But there was no sign of foul play. The doors were locked, the gas tank was half full, and his phone was gone. It was as if he had simply walked away from his life. Authorities were brought in, but the case quickly hit a wall. There was no sign of a struggle, no witnesses who saw anything suspicious. His phone was last traced to a tower in the Las Vegas area, but after that, it went silent. No bank activity, no credit card use. Nothing. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. As the days turned into weeks, theories began to swirl. Some believed Stephen had met with foul play, that he had unknowingly walked into a dangerous situation, perhaps meeting someone he had been in contact with. Others speculated he had staged his own disappearance, that he had grown tired of struggling and wanted to start over somewhere new. But those who knew him best found that hard to believe. Stephen wasn't the type to just abandon his family. He had no history of mental illness, no signs of distress that would suggest he was planning to disappear. Still, there were strange details that didn't add up. Why was he in that particular neighborhood? Sun City Anthem was a retirement community, not a place where a 30-year-old job seeker would typically be. Did he have an appointment? Was he looking for work? Or had he been lured there under false pretenses? As investigators dug deeper, more questions emerged. In the weeks before his disappearance, Stephen had seemed increasingly restless. He had been sleeping in his car at times, something completely out of character for him. His financial situation was worsening, and he may have been too embarrassed to tell anyone just how bad things had gotten. But was that enough to make him disappear? Then there was another bizarre connection. Around the same time Stephen vanished, another young man, Jesse Koecher, disappeared under similarly mysterious circumstances. Jesse, a 35-year-old man from Colorado, had been obsessed with the legend of the Lost Dutchman's gold mine in Arizona. He had traveled to the desert in search of treasure, only to disappear without a trace. Some began to wonder, was there a connection between the two? Had Stephen stumbled into something much bigger than anyone realized? Despite extensive searches, Stephen Koecher was never found. His family never gave up hope, holding on to the belief that maybe, just maybe, he was still out there somewhere. But as the years passed, hope began to fade. The case remained open, but leads grew cold. What really happened that day in Henderson? Did he meet someone who meant him harm? Did he walk away from his life, never intending to return? Or was something even stranger at play? The truth is, we may never know. But one thing is certain, people don't just vanish. Someone somewhere knows what happened to Stephen Koecher. And until that person comes forward, his story will remain one of Las Vegas's most haunting mysteries. Stephen Koecher's disappearance had all the makings of a mystery that should have been solved quickly. He wasn't some drifter with no connections. He had a loving family, a clear history, and no known enemies. Yet, as the days passed with no sign of him, it became clear that whatever happened wasn't as simple as someone walking away from their life. Something or someone was responsible. His family refused to accept that he had just vanished without reason. They drove back and forth between Utah and Nevada, searching every lead, knocking on doors, handing out flyers. His mother, Deanne, spent hours on the phone with detectives, desperate for any new piece of information. But the lack of evidence made it feel like they were chasing a ghost. The last place he had been seen, Sun City Anthem, didn't make sense. It was a quiet neighborhood, full of retirees and neatly kept lawns. Not the kind of place where trouble usually found people. But why had Stephen parked his car there? If he had been meeting someone, who was it? If he had been looking for work, why there, of all places? A neighbor's security camera had captured him walking down the street, his shadow stretching out in front of him as he moved past rows of houses. His pace wasn't hurried. He wasn't running, wasn't looking over his shoulder. He just kept walking, disappearing off the screen. But no camera ever caught him leaving. There was no sign that he had entered any of the houses. No reports of anyone seeing him knock on a door. If he had planned to meet someone, why hadn't that person come forward? And if something had happened to him there, why wasn't there any evidence? One of the biggest questions was his car. If Stephen had wanted to leave on his own, why not take his car? Why leave it parked in the same spot for days? It suggested that he had expected to come back. But he never did. The police looked at his phone records, trying to piece together his final movements. His last known activity showed his phone connecting to a cell tower in the Las Vegas area. But that was it. No more calls. No more text. As if someone had turned it off or taken it. Then there were the strange trips he had taken in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. He had driven long distances with no clear explanation, sometimes sleeping in his car. Was he chasing a job opportunity? Was he meeting someone? Or was he in trouble? Some investigators believed he had been looking for work in Las Vegas, knocking on doors, hoping for a break. But his family wasn't convinced. Stephen wasn't the kind of person to keep secrets, and he never mentioned job interviews in Nevada. If he had been planning to move, why not tell anyone? Then there was the possibility of foul play. Las Vegas was a city where people could disappear easily. The bright lights of the Strip masked a darker underbelly. Scams, criminals, people who preyed on those who were vulnerable. Had Stephen trusted the wrong person? One theory was that he had been lured into a bad situation. Maybe he had met someone online, or someone had promised him a job that didn't exist. If he had agreed to meet them in that neighborhood, thinking it was safe, could he have been ambushed? There was also the possibility that his disappearance wasn't random. Had he witnessed something he shouldn't have? Had he stumbled into a situation that put his life in danger? Then there were the stranger theories, ones that couldn't be easily dismissed. Some believed Stephen had suffered an injury or a medical episode that caused him to become disoriented. Maybe he wandered off into the desert, too confused to find his way back. But if that were the case, why hadn't anyone found his body? The area had been searched thoroughly. Others speculated that Stephen had staged his own disappearance, that the stress of job hunting and financial trouble had become too much. But those closest to him rejected that idea completely. He had bought Christmas presents for his family. He had been making plans for the future. He wouldn't have just left. Then, there was the strange coincidence of Jesse Capen's disappearance. Just days before Stephen went missing, Jesse had vanished while searching for the legendary Lost Dutchman's gold mine in Arizona. Jesse had been obsessed with treasure hunting, convinced he was close to uncovering something big. Had Stephen and Jesse somehow crossed paths? Was there a connection no one had uncovered? As time passed, the theories grew, but the answers remained elusive. There were no more leads, no more clues. The silence around Stephen's case only made it more unsettling. People don't just disappear, but somehow he had. His family continued to search, holding on to hope that someday the truth would come to light. But as the years went on, the question remained, what really happened to Stephen Koecher? And who, if anyone, held the key to solving the mystery? As time passed and the initial search for Stephen Koecher turned cold, His family refused to give up. His mother, Deanne, held on to hope, believing that if they just kept searching, just kept asking the right questions, they would find him. But as the days stretched into weeks, and then into months, hope became harder to hold on to. Investigators revisited every possible angle, retracing his last steps, studying the footage of him walking through that quiet neighborhood in Henderson. The more they analyzed it, the more unsettling it became. There was nothing outwardly suspicious about the way he moved. He wasn't running, he wasn't looking over his shoulder. He just kept walking. But to where? Then there was his car, left parked on the side of the road, locked and untouched. It felt deliberate, as if he had expected to return. But if he had left voluntarily, why wouldn't he have at least taken his phone, his wallet, or some of his belongings? The absence of any clear sign of struggle was almost more chilling than if there had been one. It suggested something happened to him out in the open, quickly and without warning. The desert stretched beyond the neighborhood, a vast, empty landscape that could swallow a person whole. Had he wandered out there, disoriented and confused? Had something or someone led him there? Some began to wonder if Stephen had been in contact with someone in the days leading up to his disappearance. His phone records showed calls and messages, but nothing that immediately stood out. There were no obvious threats, no last-minute goodbyes. But what if he had met someone he hadn't told anyone about? What if he had been lured into something under false pretenses? The theory that Stephen had been looking for work in Las Vegas still lingered. Some believed he may have answered a job listing, possibly even a scam. The city had no shortage of people preying on those desperate for money. If someone had promised him an opportunity, a chance to turn things around, would he have gone without telling anyone? And then there were the stranger theories. Some believed he had stumbled onto something dangerous, seen something he wasn't supposed to. Had he overheard a conversation? Witnessed something that made him a target? As more time passed, the unease surrounding his disappearance only grew. His face was now on missing person posters. His name passed around in online forums where amateur sleuths tried to piece together what the police could not. Some were convinced he was still out there, alive but hiding. Others feared the worst. One by one, possible leads dried up. There was no sign of his bank account being used, no calls made from his phone. He had simply vanished. But the strangest part, no one had seen or heard anything. There was no struggle, no screams, no witnesses. If he had been taken, how had no one noticed? Then a new possibility emerged, one that no one wanted to consider. What if Stephen had willingly gone with someone? What if he had trusted the wrong person? His family rejected the idea that he had staged his own disappearance. It didn't fit the person he was. He had Christmas gifts in his car. He had never shown signs of wanting to run away. But what if, in that moment, he had believed he was making the right choice? The longer the search went on, the more questions remained unanswered. And the scariest part was the realization that, even in a city filled with cameras, cell towers and constant movement, someone could still disappear without a trace. Somewhere, someone knew what had happened to Stephen Koecher. But would the truth ever come to light? Months had passed, and the mystery of Stephen Koecher's disappearance only deepened. His family had exhausted every lead, searched every possible place he could have gone, but nothing ever surfaced. The silence surrounding his case was eerie. No new sightings, no confirmed clues, just the same questions repeating over and over. Where had he gone? And why had no one come forward? Then, something unexpected happened. A private investigator, hired by Stephen's family, began reviewing his phone records again, looking for anything that might have been overlooked. There had been calls to various people, most of them friends or family, but then there was one number that stood out, one that hadn't been fully investigated. It belonged to a burner phone, untraceable to any real name. The investigator dug deeper, trying to figure out who the number belonged to, but it led nowhere. Burner phones were used for a reason. Someone didn't want to be found. But why had Stephen been in contact with this number? And more importantly, had this person been the reason he went to that Henderson neighborhood in the first place? Stephen's family hadn't known of anyone in his life who would need a burner phone. He wasn't involved in anything shady, wasn't the type to associate with dangerous people. But what if he had unknowingly gotten caught up in something? What if someone had reached out to him, pretending to offer help or a job, only to lead him into a trap? Then another strange detail surfaced. A witness, who had never come forward before, claimed they had seen a man matching Stephen's description in the days after he disappeared. He had been in a part of Las Vegas known for transient activity, cheap motels, people coming and going without a trace. The witness wasn't entirely sure, but they remembered the man seeming disoriented, as if he didn't know where he was or how he had gotten there. Could it have been Stephen? If so, why hadn't he contacted anyone? Was he being held against his will? Or had something happened to him that made him unable to reach out? The revelation sent his family into a new frenzy of searching. They combed the area, asked questions, checked security footage from businesses nearby. But once again the trail went cold. If Stephen had been there, he was gone now. And then an even bigger twist emerged, one that no one had expected. A former co-worker of Stephen's, someone he had worked with years before, reached out with a strange story. They recalled Stephen mentioning something about a job opportunity in Nevada, something that seemed too good to be true. At the time they hadn't thought much of it. But now, looking back, they wondered if it had been connected to his disappearance. Was Stephen lured into something dangerous? Did he trust the wrong person, believing they were offering him a way out of his struggles? The burner phone, the possible sighting, the mention of a mysterious job offer, it all pointed to one chilling possibility. Stephen hadn't just walked away. Someone had been involved. Someone had been waiting for him. But who? And why? With each new piece of information, the mystery of Stephen Koecher's disappearance only became darker, more tangled, and more unsettling. And just when it seemed like they might be getting closer to the truth, everything took another unexpected turn, one that no one saw coming. The discovery of the burner phone connection had changed everything. It was no longer just a theory. Someone had been in contact with Stephen before he disappeared, someone who didn't want to be found. His family was certain that this was the missing piece, the key to finally understanding what had happened to him. But without a name, without a way to track the phone's owner, it felt like they were back at square one. Then, an unexpected breakthrough. A retired detective who had been following the case out of personal interest, decided to dig into old police records. He looked for any recent crimes or suspicious activity in the same Henderson neighborhood where Stephen had last been seen. That's when he found something that sent chills down his spine. Just a few streets away, around the same time Stephen disappeared, there had been reports of a man knocking on doors, asking strange questions about available housing. Some residents had dismissed him as a lost salesman, but one person remembered him looking nervous, almost like he was searching for someone. The description matched Stephen. If Stephen had been knocking on doors, was he looking for a place to stay? Was he meeting someone? Or was he trying to escape from something? The detective followed that thread, looking into similar reports across the city. That's when he found an unsettling pattern. Other people had gone missing in the area under strange circumstances, though none had received as much attention as Stephen's case. Most were men traveling alone, some of them job seekers, others passing through town. Could it have been a coincidence? Or was something larger at play? Then, the biggest break yet. A journalist investigating unsolved cases came forward with a tip. She had been researching a series of scams in Las Vegas, fraudulent job offers that lured people to the city under false pretenses. The scammers would promise work, sometimes even housing, but once their victims arrived, things would take a dark turn. Some were robbed, others were pressured into situations they couldn't escape from, and some were never heard from again. Stephen had been struggling financially. He had been looking for opportunities. If someone had reached out to him with a promising offer, could he have fallen for it? The more they looked into it, the more it made sense. The burner phone could have belonged to one of these scammers. If Stephen had arranged to meet them, thinking it was for a job, he might have walked right into a trap. But if that was the case, what had happened next? Why had no one seen him again? A final clue emerged when the detective uncovered security footage from a convenience store miles away from where Stephen's car had been found. The footage was grainy, but there in the background was a man who looked just like Stephen. He wasn't alone. He was with someone taller wearing a dark jacket, his face turned away from the camera. The timestamp was 2 days after Stephen vanished. This changed everything. If Stephen had been seen alive after his disappearance, it meant he hadn't just walked into the desert and gotten lost. It meant someone had taken him. The man in the dark jacket. Who was he? The footage was too blurry to identify him, but it raised a terrifying possibility. Had Stephen been forced into something against his will? Had he been taken by someone who didn't want him to leave? The police took the footage seriously, but by the time they followed up, too much time had passed. The convenience store clerk didn't remember the men, and no transactions linked Stephen to the store. Once again the trail went cold. But the final twist came from an unexpected source. A woman who had been staying in the same area of Las Vegas at the time saw a news report about Stephen's case. She reached out, claiming she had met a man who looked like him. He had seemed confused, asking about bus routes and talking about needing to get back home. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, just another traveler passing through. But now she wasn't so sure. Could Stephen have escaped, if only for a moment? Had he tried to find a way home, only to be pulled back into whatever situation he had gotten caught up in? The truth was agonizingly close, but still out of reach. His family now believed he had been lured to Las Vegas by someone offering him work, that he had been taken or trapped in a situation he couldn't escape from. The sighting at the store, the woman's memory of him trying to leave, it all suggested he had been alive, trying to find a way out. But what happened after that moment? Did he make another attempt to escape? Or did the person who had taken him make sure he was never seen again? Stephen's case remains unsolved, but one thing is clear. He didn't simply vanish. Someone knows what happened. Someone holds the answers. And until the truth comes to light, his family will never stop searching. The weight of uncertainty never faded for Stephen Koecher's family. Despite every lead, every piece of information that seemed to bring them closer, the final answer remained just out of reach. He had been seen. He had possibly tried to escape. And yet, somehow, he had still disappeared. Over the years, the theories continued. Some believed he had been forced into something against his will, trapped in a situation he never intended to be in. Others wondered if he had suffered a medical episode, leaving him confused and vulnerable, making him easy prey for the wrong person. And then there were those who clung to the idea that maybe, just maybe, he was still out there somewhere. That he had survived. His family never stopped searching. His mother, Deanne, held on to the hope that one day, a new piece of evidence would surface. That someone who knew something would finally come forward. She revisited every clue, every possibility, refusing to let his story be forgotten. The hardest part wasn't just not knowing, it was knowing how easily he had vanished. How, in a city filled with people, with cameras on every corner, someone could still disappear without a trace. But as the years stretched on, the reality became harder to ignore. If Stephen had been alive, surely he would have reached out. He had been close with his family, even in his hardest times. He wouldn't have just walked away from them, from the life he had before. There were moments when hope flickered. Occasional tips from strangers, possible sightings, online discussions reigniting interest in his case. But none ever led to the truth. Law enforcement still considers Stephen's case open, but as time passes, the likelihood of finding new evidence grows smaller. The people who may have been involved, if foul play was a factor, have likely moved on, their secrets buried deeper with each passing year. The burner phone, the job scam theories, the possible escape attempt, it all paints a terrifying picture. One where Stephen may have trusted the wrong person, only to find himself in a situation he couldn't escape from. His story has become one of those chilling reminders of how quickly a life can be altered. How one choice, one meeting, one moment can change everything. It has also become a cautionary tale, about the dangers that lurk in places we don't always expect, about how even the kindest, most trusting people can find themselves in situations beyond their control. His family still hopes for closure. Maybe one day someone will speak up. Maybe new technology will uncover something the original investigation missed. Maybe by keeping his story alive, they will finally get the answers they have been searching for. Until then, Stephen Koecher remains a mystery. A man who set out on a journey, looking for opportunity, for hope, for a better future, only to vanish into the shadows of Las Vegas, leaving behind nothing but questions. And a family still waiting for the day those questions will finally be answered.